Actually ended up switching that major into a more business focused major. I took 2 years in a business specific role, mostly working with clients directly. And then during those 2 years, I had realized that, you know what, I definitely don't want to be on the business side of things. And I want to be more on the technology side and working with, building products. And so with that said, I spent 2 years really figuring out how I can get into a more product specific role on the technology side. And so maybe here's just a list of things that I did, right? I went to as many panels, and so I'm based in LA. And as you know, LA is a pretty big tech ecosystem as well. And so I would go to panels, I would go to like hackathons, I would go and have set up coffee meetings, and I subscribe to every well-known investor and product leader in the world to really get a digest of what's happening in the world and in the product world, what's happening and who's innovating, who's modernizing, who's revolutionizing industries, right? There are so many thought leaders that, especially investors, what you'll find, at least with investors, the reason why I like reading through investors' newsletters is because most of these investors have product backgrounds, right? They came from the bottom and worked their way up, started in product, became a CEO, founded their own companies. Then they got bored of that and became investors. And so now as an investor, right, they get to see the landscape of industries across the board. And so what you see on here, you'll notice that I have parade cards listed here. So my first product that I launched was a video-based product that was bringing video to greeting cards. Spent about a year doing that, and realized that if I were to do it all over again, I wouldn't have spent a year building that. I would have spent a couple months, tested, validated, been a little bit more lean, but you kind of learn that's hindsight is 2020, right? And then from Parade, I moved over into a product role at ADP, worked my way to be a senior. And now at ADP, I manage a compliance portfolio of 7 different products with onboarding, and also work on the platform team. So maybe I could dive in a little bit about what that means, right? So when we sell our product to the clients, they need to onboard into the product. And today, ADP truly doesn't have digital onboarding experiences. So me and my teams are responsible for building that digital experience while also revamping how we support the client during that process, right? So we're introducing new platform services like document upload, e-signature, capabilities that clients didn't have before. And they're not really revolutionary. Some of them might be. We're actually pushing the boundaries on some things that are, a little edgy, but yeah, so that's kind of what I do at ADP. And then separately, you'll notice I have something called Shop Latinx at the bottom. So I've been working with the founder for the past couple months, and likely going to continue doing that. So Shop Latinx we're building the #1 marketplace in the world for Latinx products. And so what that means is it's a non-binary term, right? But these are products that are designed specifically for Latin people, right? And I'm sure there's very similar marketplaces or even products that are designed, for Black people and for Indian folks, right? Because you don't want the generic product that comes out that doesn't really like the shampoo, it doesn't work for you, right? Or even clothing that's more cultural, right? So we're really targeting that consumer market, and it seems to be growing, especially with millennials and Gen Z. So that's kind of my product background at the moment. And now maybe we can get to the core of the discussion, right? So one of the things that we mentioned in the agenda was that we wanted to talk about strategic versus tactical product management, right? And maybe before I kind of go through this list here, like what is the difference, right? So when we think of tactical product management, we think of like, oh, I get to work with the engineering team, I get to work with the design team, I get to write user stories, right? I get to go on the whiteboard and kind of do the day-to-day things, right? Not to say that's not important. It's definitely important, right? But you can teach anybody tactical product management, right? I could go teach somebody off the street right now, like, hey, here's how to write a user story, right? But that's not what makes a product manager great at what that person does, right? It's the strategic part that makes a product manager a part of that top 1%, right? Or be that top product manager in the company that you work with. And so what is strategy, right? So when you think about strategic product management, you're thinking more of like business outcomes, right? You're thinking about the vision. You're thinking about how your technology supports the business like 5 to 10 years from now. You're thinking about how are your tactical decisions supporting business growth, right? Or revenue, or a reduction in operational cost, right? So things that are more strategic, right? When you talk to executives, they don't want to hear that you wrote 10 user stories, right? And then your product metric is that you saw a lot of traction on the website, right? Like that's great. That's good. That's good stuff, right? But if all you have is traction on your website, but nobody's buying anything, then that metric is really not meaningful, right? It means that you almost did it. You almost did a good job, right? Like in the executive's mindset, you have to think like an executive, right? Think like if this is your company. If you're gonna come and look for your product leaders to do a presentation on how well things are going, you don't care about how much traffic is on your website, right? You care more about like, hey, are people buying things? Or depending on your product, right? Are they using the app that you built? Like if we're thinking about like let's say like a meditation app, right? Are they actually meditating? Like when they download the app, are they doing a meditation the first time they download, right? So you have to help figure out what the definition of success is for your product at the same time, right? There's a difference between product success and business success, right? If your product success is doing really well, but your business outcomes aren't doing so well, then you're really not making an impact, right? And so you really want to marry those two things together. So I'll kind of just walk through these two as well, right? So product strategy aligns with the company vision, right? So whatever that company vision is, how is your product strategy supporting that, right? If your company vision is that you're looking to generate, let's say you're going to grow by X% to hit $500,000 in recurring revenue, right? And you're currently at 250K. Well, if your product strategy has no goals in terms of enabling more revenue or building a new product or any product goals that don't support that revenue strategy, then you're like, there's a misalignment there, right? Like there must be an issue there. It's either one, you don't understand the company vision, maybe it hasn't been articulated very well, or three, maybe there needs to be more strategic discussions around the strategy for product, right? Go and maybe you might not be in those discussions, and that's not a bad thing, right? When you first start out, you're likely not going to be in that room with the executives. You're likely not going to be in the room with all of the senior leaders on the product side. But there are ways to get involved, right? And as I kind of walk through some of the next slides, you'll start to understand how you can work your way up into some of those conversations, right? If you don't ask the question, then you're never going to know. And if you don't ask the question, then nobody's going to really know that you're interested either, right? And so people who are very strategic, like one of the sayings I always say, even to the founder of Shop Latinx, is that like every decision you make needs to be a strategic decision. There is no like, hey, I'm just going to do this because I got this like gut feeling. Sometimes the gut feeling is there, right? But like, at least think about it. At least put some thought into it. see how that might impact, whether that's your customer, whether that's business partners or partnerships, right? Separately, what's the technical strategy, right? How does that support the growth of the business long term? Part of being a product manager, so one, maybe just as a qualifier, you do not need to be 100% technical, right? I didn't come into this with an engineering background, although albeit I'd say I'm more technical than most product managers, but that's through experience, right? You can learn the technical side of product management by being a product manager, right? Ask the questions that you don't know to your engineering teams, right? There are many times when I go to my engineering counterpart or even the engineers that I work with, and I ask them like, hey, like, what does this mean, right? You'll find that most product managers assume that other product managers already know things, and they don't. You'll even find that if you ask your bosses, right, some of these technical questions, they won't even know it either. And that's not a bad thing, right? But if you want to level up, ask the dumb questions. Don't be afraid to ask. You'll find that your engineering counterparts are actually more willing to help you understand and be more successful. So that way you can communicate that strategy to everyone else, right? You're not going to explain like the API development, right, to a business stakeholder. You might break that down in a way that makes them understand it in a more business mindset, right? So when you think of technical strategy, right, you're thinking like, when I think of technical strategy, I think, hey, is this product going to scale, right? If we have 100 customers now, if we hit 10,000 customers in a year, there's always going to be work on the engineering side to make things scalable, right? But you can make strong decisions now technically. So that way, when you get to that scale, it's not like rework, right? You're not like re-implementing a solution. And it just depends too, like where you're at as a company, right? If you're in a startup, then there's the saying that that goes as do things that don't scale, right? Meaning, hey, if you want to put something out in the market, put it out in the market, and maybe behind the scenes, you're kind of just manually doing things, and that's fine. Right? That's different, right? That's really just about like testing and validating your product, right? It's different. It's really different than an MVP. And when I think MVP, I think minimum valuable product, right? The product needs to be valuable. If it's not valuable to your customer or your consumer or your client, then you're not delivering as a product manager, right? You're delivering a product that's half baked. And you're going to get that feedback. And if that's your goal, then that's different. But if it's not your goal, then that's where you should really think through more deeply around like what valuable means to your customer, and then hit that target. And I think what I'm touching on a little bit too, if you notice, is that there's like two different types of product management, right? You have like blue ocean, which is like, let's build an entire product for a year and then release it, only to find out that nobody even likes it, right? You don't want that. And I'm sure you know of many scenarios and use cases that that you've seen companies do, and then it's flops, right? And then they're trying to figure out like, who's my customer now, right? They thought it was this customer, that customer actually doesn't want it, and now they're trying to like fit a product into a market that nobody was even asking for, right? Now, if you're in an enterprise product, right, I kind of have the best of both worlds, because Shop Latinx is mostly a startup, and then ADP is very enterprise, right? So almost a $15 billion company, and any decisions you make there, right, like what I'm building there, we support close to 700,000 clients, right? So you make one decision, and all of a sudden, your business stakeholders are at your door or ringing your phone, like, what's going on? But yeah, so, keep that in mind while you're building product. Be very strategic. Don't always think about like, how am I going to write this user story, or how am I going to explain this to my engineer? That's the day-to-day. You're always going to have to do that. You're never not going to have to think about that, right? You're always, when you're talking with your engineering and design teams, that's normal, right? That's always going to happen. Being strategic at all times. Now that's to me, that's the fun stuff, but it's also sometimes very difficult, right? Because you tend to get into some discussions where you might not have as much experience, right? Like we'll be talking about a little bit about business cases in a bit. How well do you know finance? If the answer is no, that's okay. You know, maybe right now is not the right time to learn a little bit about finance. Maybe you need to focus more on learning the product strategy side, or learning how to build better relationships, right? And we'll get into that as well. But pick one thing, right? And figure out how to get better at the different things that you do on a daily basis. And then last but not least, do what works, right? I'm sure you guys know who Marty Kagan is, right? He's like one of the most well-known product leaders in the world. He came to LA this past year, in 2019. And I remember him talking about Scrum and Agile, and at the end of it, he's like, you know what? All of those things are great guidelines to help you build a good culture around product management. But at the end of the day, do what works, right? If there are things in Scrum and Agile that don't work for you and your team, then change them. There's no reason. It's not a Bible, right? Like, you don't have to follow it like line by line. Be flexible. If you're some things don't work for your designers, right? Like, I ask my designers all the time, like, ask this question. This is always like good to ask like any stakeholder this question, right? So I remember when we first launched our first digital onboarding experience, and it was a little rough, right? Because this was the first time we were going through this process, and there was a lot to consider, a lot to build, a lot to keep in mind. And at the end of that release, I asked my designer, like, how can we work better together? Is there anything I can do to change the way I work to make you more successful, and ultimately to make the product more successful, right? And you always want to come back to the customer. Sometimes you get caught up in conversations where you want to win the fight, right? And you think you're right, or you think you're right. And so you try to really push for what you believe in, right? But at the end of the day, what people can align to and what people can agree to is the customer, right? So if you can focus your influencing skills and your negotiation skills around the customer, then people can wrap their heads around that, right? Because now it becomes less about me versus you and more about let's do what's right for the customer, right? And that's how you can kind of position that. So I'm going to take a break from this piece and move to the next slide. But Piyush, do you want me to pause? Are we going to take questions along the way? Maybe I should just pause there.
Yes. So we already have one question from Robert in the chat section.
Okay. I can't see it. Do you mind?
Yes, I'll read it.
Okay.
So he says, okay, so we don't have a question.
No. Okay. Well, we can
Yeah.
move forward.
So yeah, we can move forward.
Okay.
So guys, you can put up the question in chat section, or you can speak up directly if you want.
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks, Piyush. Okay. So next, right, is partnership with stakeholders and executive management. So as a product manager, I think and I know this was enticing for me when I first got into product, right? I wanted to be able to be that person that can work with the executives and work with sales and marketing, work with the product team, right? Work with partners around like whether they're clients, customers, or users. You're kind of like the center of that world almost, right? But that being the center of that world really gives you no authority. That's the other thing, right? So everyone always talks about, like, you hear that phrase, right? I'm the CEO of like, I'm the CEO of the product. Like, I think you can frame that in a way that makes it sound okay, but I just don't like that phrase, because you're really not. You're really the person that's helping build an experience for the customer that everyone can agree to, right? Without a product manager, right, everyone makes decisions and like randomly, that what you'll find is like, if you don't have a product person, you end up with like a product that looks like Frankenstein, right? And Frankenstein just means it's just made up of a bunch of different parts that are like, that don't make sense, right? Some monolithic product. And so it's important that you partner with these different types of folks here, right? So for executives, you might, again, right, I'll take it from different perspectives in case we have different folks in here. If you're a junior product manager and you're barely getting in, or you're barely getting into product, then you might not have the opportunity to sit in these discussions with executives. If you're in a startup, you probably will, right? You're going to own that thing end to end, and you're going to be held responsible for that, right? And so with that said, if you are in those meetings, then make sure you prep, right? Understand that these executives are looking for business outcomes. They care about the product metrics, but only if they're impacting these business outcomes, right? So I'm reiterating that because that's important to note, right? Especially if you're a publicly owned company, ultimately these executives have to report into a board of directors, right? They have to go and relay to the market how well the company is doing. And if product isn't, playing their part and aligning with that company vision, then that's going to be a challenge, right? And I would just say, take on that responsibility if of really understanding your product deeply. And then sales and marketing, right? So for me, I work mostly on the onboarding side. So in that respect, I work with mostly sales. From time to time, I do work with marketing, because as we build out this onboarding experience, it also will allow us to like have clients purchase our products on our experience, right? And so as you are building too, right? So from a product lens, as you're building, like, are you building your product in a way that allows it to extend to different types of functionalities, right? When you think of Shopify as an example, right? Shopify has built, like, they're a platform product, right? Meaning that they've enabled e-commerce brands to just whip up a website in seconds, right? Or even minutes, however long that might take. But the point of that is that they built a product that allows it's not one-to-one, it's like one-to-many, right? And then in addition to that, they realized, oh, great, well, we have this awesome platform. Some people might not want to use our user experience. So why don't we just enable our platform so that other people can build user experiences on top of it, right? So keep that in mind. I always find that, like, when I work with other product managers, like, having a platform, having a solid understanding of platform will make you a more effective product manager in any route that you go, whether you are in a specific product vertical, right? Like, meaning you're working on one product end to end, or you're working on platform where you're just building out services that other products can use, where platform is mostly a horizontal position, right? Where you can work across. And yeah, and so from there, right, you want to partner with sales and marketing. So on the sales side, how is what you're building going to help your sales team sell more? Is it demoable, right? Can you give them the tools to help them succeed as a salesperson? Sometimes those conversations kind of can get in the way of what you're building, right? So that's part of building that relationship with sales and marketing. They want to know what's being built so they can relay to your existing clients, potentially new clients, right? Or prospects. So that's also important. You'll start to find, like, as we go through this, you're gonna be like, how in the heck do I find time to, like, meet with all of these people? The product role is very extensive, so you signed up for it. And then so the last two is being able to partner with clients, customers, and users, right? If you are not meeting with your customer, how are you building the right product? If you haven't done any customer research, how are you building the best product? And if you're not doing any of that, then you're not really being a product manager, right? Like, you need to get out the door. You need to, whether you're visiting them in person, if you don't have the ability to visit in person, obviously no one can right now, then you should be meeting virtually with them, right? Ask them about how they're using the product, or work with your user research team if you have one, right? Come up with a research plan on how you can learn more from your client or your customer or user, whatever the one is, right? Those discussions should help lead you to building a better product, right? Which then results in, better business outcomes. And then last but not least is your Scrum team, right? They are just as important, right? You were in the front line and you were really that bridge between the business and the development team and the design teams. You are mostly that focal point. It should be that you, and what I'd say is provide as much visibility to your product teams as much as you can, right? They want to be motivated to know, they want to know that their work is making an impact. And if they don't know that, then, how else are they going to be motivated to build the best product, to come out with the best technical design, to understand that somebody's recognizing them, right? There's like this saying by Dale Carnegie. It's a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People, where he says, be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. And so what that means is whenever you have to provide constructive criticism, be careful about the words you choose, make it a constructive critique. Don't make it personal, because it's never about, it's always about the customer. Remember, just centering it around the customer again. Sometimes you fail and you'll learn. Sometimes you fail and it's a really bad outcome, right? But at the end of the day, how do you turn a negative outcome into a positive one from a relationship standpoint, right? How do you motivate somebody who might have made the wrong decision, or maybe they made a good decision and you guys both agreed on it, but there was a bad outcome? There's a learning experience from that, but there's definitely just be very careful with the words you choose, because you want this person to come out of that experience hungry to be better, right? Motivated to want to have a stronger outcome the next time. And then lavish in your praise means, when you have a great outcome, provide that feedback back. Recently we had released something on onboarding where we had a lot of great feedback from our business stakeholders. And what I did is I just screenshotted all of that feedback and sent it straight to the engineering team. And you have no idea how happy they were when I sent that, right? It's the small things, it's the little things that make people feel good about what they do. And you'll notice that when you make people feel good at what they do, that they will produce results, right? And that goes for you as a product manager as well, right? When you don't hear things that kind of complement what you've been working on, it's challenging. It can be difficult, right? Especially when you're in the weeds and you're really pushing for a release, right? And so, yeah, I'll leave it there. I think I saw a couple of things in the chat. Let me see. It's not popping up. Oh, here we go.
Yes, so I'll read up the questions for you. We have some questions in our chat section.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Piyush.
Yeah. So first we have a question from Kent. If you feel you have checked all the boxes to move from product managers to senior product manager, how would you recommend asking for a promotion?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's definitely one that I've broached before as well. I think one, you should come up with a list of things that you think defines what a senior product manager is, right? What are the other senior product managers doing in your organization right now, right? One of the best advice that I've gotten from a mentor of mine was, look, you need to be doing this. If you're looking to be a senior product manager, you need to be doing the senior product management responsibilities right now. So that way you can show that you can take that role, right? That role is yours. And so if you have some responsibilities that are more senior product oriented, that's great. If you don't, then I'd recommend figuring out how to, you know, extend some of your responsibilities. Is there a project that maybe nobody's taken, you know, or a new idea that somebody came up with where you can take that on, right? Now let's say that you've checked all the boxes, right? You've done that work, and you feel that you've put the work in to get that promotion. Ask, really, honestly, just find your, depending on your relationship with your boss, right? I just so happen, like when at ADP, my mentor is actually my boss as well, and that's not always true for everyone, right? But this is why building relationships are important. So go take your boss out to lunch, right? Go have coffee, go on a walk, chat with them, ask them about, you know, where they see you, like, you know, I know, at least for me, like my annual reviews, right? I know they're coming up, right? So like what I want to do, and I know I want something like a raise or a bonus or even a promotion. It's like I'm in my boss's ear a year before like that is going to happen, right? I'm planting the seed in his head that, hey, look, my goal is to become a senior product manager. And I'm hoping that, you know, by our next review, I can hit that. Is that something that you think is that something you think I'm ready for? And hear the response, right? You're going to get the feedback right away. And let them be honest, you know, if the answer is, you know what, I think you're ready, or you're almost there. Here's what I'd like to see from you, right? Then great. Now you just have a whole bunch of action items that you need to take down, right? Write them down, make note of them. And when you hit those goals, or when you think you've satisfied that need, share that with your boss, right? Continue to go on coffee walks and mention those things, right? Make it a lighthearted conversation. You know, when you think you've done something well, it's like, hey, like, you know, we released this, we had some great outcomes, like, you know, continue to broach that question. Don't make it something taboo. If you make it awkward, you're going to make it awkward for everyone, right? So just have that open conversation. Okay.
So Akshay added to the same question. How do you qualify as a senior product manager?
It's a good question. So I think that question is very subjective, right? It depends on the company that you're with, whether you're in a startup or you're in an enterprise company. Usually what you can do is you can go and look at a requisition, right? Like any open role, or even ask your boss directly, right? You know, what is it going to take for me to become a senior product manager? Like that's my goal, right? Like you should never go into a role knowing that you don't know what the next step is. If your boss hasn't approached you about it, then you should bring it up. Okay.
So he has one more question. How should a product manager look to spend first 3 to 6 months in an enterprise setup like ADP?
Love this question. So whenever I've hired like a new product manager, or somebody else has hired a product manager to ADP, or even just my general advice for this, not even and this goes for startup or enterprise, right? Meet with every single product manager, meet with one product manager every day. Go build a relationship, go establish a relationship with everybody. Make sure everybody knows who you are, right? You're the product manager leading onboarding. You're the product manager leading the revenue product. You're the product manager leading the revamp of the user experience, whatever that is. But they should know who you are, right? Go establish that relationship, whether it's coffee. If you don't have the money, then go on a coffee walk, right? Now you don't need to spend the money. Spending the money is a nice gesture, but the intent is that you're seeking out people to understand what they do, right? And then go meet your engineering counterparts as well, right? That's the number one advice I would give. And secondary to that is, you know, you're going to be in listening mode for a while. You're going to be processing, like especially if you're new to the product or new to the industry, right? You have a lot to learn. So go to as many discussions as you can, take as many notes as you can, right? As a product manager, you used to be the best note taker. That's one thing I found, is that my documentation is probably better than anyone's. And maybe that's a little egotistical, but like you should strive to have like, you know, be very disciplined about writing things down. Okay. Should we take one more, Piyush, and then jump back?
Yes. So next we have question from Sakruti. What advice would you give to a young graduate looking to break into product management when most company expect prior experience?
Yeah, great question, right? So, like, I'm sure there's, I'm not sure how the landscape is in India, but I know, like, in the US, right? Like, for a long time, and I think it's still true today, like, the product managers that are getting hired right out of college are coming from Stanford or Berkeley, right? And those are like two of the top schools in two of some of the top schools in the US. And so the competition is very fierce. It's like a product job is like the hottest job to have, right? In tech, almost, I'd say. And so you need to show that you can do the job, right? I mentioned earlier, like, on the question of like, how do I get to a senior PM, right? If I feel like I checked all the boxes, well, how do you get to the PM position at all? And if you don't check any of those boxes, then you can't expect to land a role, right? Just by interviewing. You need to put in the work. Like I mentioned that I spent 2 years. Not everyone is fortunate, right, to like have like a family member or a friend that works at Google or Facebook, right? Like you're not always going to have that luxury or that privilege. And so for me, it was, well, somebody told me like, well, go build a product, you know, you don't have to spend money. There's how many no code tools are out there in the market right now that you can go and build a product, test it out, get feedback, talk to customers, show that you can actually build a product and be a product manager. Show that you delivered value, or maybe you didn't deliver value, but what was the reason, right? Like when I'm interviewing new product managers, I care about what work they've done prior to trying to become that product manager, right? And then also I look for how you're thinking about the product, right? If I gave you like a good question that someone gave me when I was first starting was, if I give you $100 and I asked you to split the $100 between bugs, new features, a new partnership that will force you to, pivot. And then there's a fourth one that I can't remember, but like, how would you think about that, right? Then you have the most common question around like, what's your favorite product? Which is a good question to know, a good question to understand, and a good answer to have at hand in case you need to respond to that. So that would be my advice. If you think you're more of a user experience person, go redesign a user experience, right? Partner with a designer, go interview customers, do some user research. If you think you're more technical, then go build an actual product, right? Go work with an engineer, or go find a person who's building something, go to a hackathon, right? Go build a product and meet people, and then go work with them after. That's actually how I started working on parade cards. Is I went to a hackathon, hit it off, or built a good relationship with the founder at the hackathon. We came in second place, and she asked me to come work with her. And that's kind of how things work, right? Like, there's another founder in LA who founded a flower delivery company and innovated on the distribution side. And he always said he was never even in tech. He was a marketing guy. And he said the reason why he was successful is because he kept showing up. If you keep showing up, nobody can ignore that, right? When I wanted to join ADP, I literally went to a conference that ADP sponsored. I met somebody there. They told me about a happy hour. I went to the happy hour. I met more of the people there. Then they invited me for like a mock interview. I did that. And then finally I applied, and like, I not only built a product by myself, but I also put in the work to build relationships. And that's why those two things are very important in product, even prior to being in product and in the product role itself. Okay, let's jump back, and then maybe we could tackle these questions. I only have 2 slides left, so I'm gonna put this to the side for a second. Okay, so this is a good segue because we're talking about building relationships, right? So one, when you're in conversations or meetings, don't always make it about business, right? Who is the other person that you're talking to? Do they have a family, right? Where did they live? You know, build a personal relationship with that person, right? You don't want to build a transactional relationship, because transactional relationships never turn into, those conversations are never easy to have when you're talking about like negotiations, and um, you want people to talk well about you, right? If you want to move up, people have to like you. That's one thing as well. Go grab lunch with somebody. I mentioned that. Go on coffee walks. Go find a mentor and go on 10-minute walks to debrief with him, right? Um, if it takes you a while to find that mentor, that's okay, right? But that's the whole purpose of why I mentioned, like, go and meet every product manager in the building, and also all of the product leaders in the building. They might be tough to find time with, but they will make time for you. I promise you that. They will not turn you down. If they do, then that's rare, I'd say, in my experience. But it's important to find that mentor, because what you're going to want to do is, on a weekly basis, you know, go on a walk with them, or on their time, figure out how you can like walk the aisles with them and kind of talk product, you know, talk about like what you're working on. Maybe there's some challenges you're facing. Maybe you can't figure out a stakeholder and you just don't understand why. And maybe there's some context that you don't know. Maybe they're getting pressure from, you know, the executives as well, that if they don't deliver, you know, XYZ is going to happen. And so it's important to find that mentor, because they help you bring perspective into your role, right? You might not have that perspective early on, which is okay. But as you grow as a product manager, that perspective becomes very important, right? You start to understand, like, oh, I know this person over here is very close with the president of the company.
Hello.
Um, I know that this. Okay, I think we're good. Um, and then you start to understand the landscape, right? You start to grow as a leader. And then separately, I have in this middle, right? Like, work on being consistent. Be consistent. Like, that's the number one advice I can give. Don't like on the left hand side, do those things. If you can't, that's okay, but just keep that in mind, right? I think as you grow as a senior, you start to do some of the things on the left less. But what I find is the things on the left as a senior person are more meaningful for the other people, right? So there are new product managers or junior product managers that will join, and now they're looking for me to help them, right? And it's a good way to pay it forward. And also, not only do you have like the support of your senior leaders now, because you've built that reputation and built those relationships, but now you're helping the younger crew, right? Or the more junior crew. And now you're going to earn that, like, you're going to earn a reputation of, wow, you know, this person delivers not only great product, has great relationships, understands the business, understands the landscape of the industry, right? You start to and then it feels good, you know, like if you do all these things, like these are very small things that you can take away from this discussion that you can implement right away, right? It's not, you're not figuring out how to like code now, right? That's not the goal. And then you'll find that if you do these things, they'll result in smoother negotiations and being able to influence people, right? When it comes down to prioritizing things, or making trade-offs or getting alignment, you're going to realize that these conversations are much easier because these people actually like you, right? That um, that you've built a personal relationship, that they know that you care, right? I remember this one time where I couldn't crack the code on this one engineering leader who wouldn't buy off on something that I was looking for his team to build. And the product manager was on board. They just didn't agree with the approach. And so what I did is I took that person out to lunch, and I actually took him on a team lunch. So there was like 4 of us product managers. I paid for his lunch. And he even said it. He's like, what are you trying to do here? You're trying to, you know, make it easier for me to say yes. And, you know, we joked about it, but we had a good time. It was a good lunch. And I think after that, he knew that I meant well, right? It wasn't that I was trying to bulldoze or like override somebody's like authority, right? It was more of a, why not try it? You know, let's test it out. Let's see what happens. If it doesn't work, then let's go back. You know, we can rethink that decision. You know, be likable. there is, you know, whether you want to acknowledge that or not, there is definitely a level of understanding of being more likable. Go joke with people. I mean, you know your personality, right? If you're an introverted person, this might be more difficult. There are other ways to do things, right? Where you can do the small things. Like I know I have a program manager who's pretty introverted too, but she leaves things on my desk, you know, like a little note, or like candy, like during a holiday. Like those small things mean a lot, right? Because I know like for her, she's not into like going to lunch and kind of talking through the halls and stuff like that. But I know she tries, right? So there are different things that you can do to be more likable. And then with that, you get visibility within the organization, right? So if more people know who you are, then the more opportunities you're going to see naturally, right? The more people are going to want to come to you for questions, right? Sometimes I'm not even the right product manager for some of my business stakeholders, but they know that I know everyone else in the product organization, that I can say, oh, I know what you're asking for, and you need to go talk to so and so. Let me shoot an email and introduce you, right? Man, that alone, like, how much credibility did you just build with that stakeholder by making that small gesture, right? It's the small things that really like help you as a product manager succeed. And you're going to notice that a lot of what I'm talking about here are very soft skills, right? The hard skills you can learn. You can learn how to use Jira. You can learn how to use Confluence. Those are just tools, right? And again, like I mentioned, that's tactical, right? You can go teach somebody like off the street how to do that, but you can't teach soft skills. Soft skills are things that you have to really work on to be that like effective leader. Okay. Maybe we could take I'm going to go to the next slide and then we can take questions. That way we have a little bit more time. Business cases and business outcomes, right? What motivates executives? So there's the saying, you know, outcomes over output. Now, what does that mean? Outcomes here on the left, these are business outcomes, right? These actually deliver value to the business, but they also deliver customer value, like that I'm showing on the right. What doesn't deliver value are outputs, right? You released 5 times in 1 week. Like that is not meaningful at all. I could care less, right? Did you actually deliver value if you released 5 times? If you released 5 times, I almost want to ask you like, how many bugs did you introduce to the product because you think working faster is actually helping you, right? One of the things I always say to my teams are like, we need to work slower to move faster, right? Let's make sure we vet everything out. Let's make sure that we thought about the customer experience. Let's make sure we thought about by making some of these product decisions that we didn't cause more work for our operations team, right? Like you have to really think, when I say strategic, you really got to think through that, right? You want to build a great product experience, you want to build a great product, then you have to do the work. You have to see it from a business lens, right? As a product manager, sometimes you can get caught up thinking like, man, this is like cool technology, right? And you're working with your engineers, and it is, but at the same time, like it's your responsibility as product manager to make sure you're thinking about the customer and you're thinking about your business counterparts. And these business outcomes are what motivates executives, right? They want to know that, hey, these product decisions you're making are driving revenue, they're driving growth, they're reducing operating costs, or they're delivering a better customer experience, right? And these are very surface level, so you can kind of break them down, right? If I'm an e-commerce company and I'm thinking revenue, is my, you know, conversion rate doing well? Meaning like if they land on my website, are they buying the product? And when I say those product metrics, right, sometimes they call them vanity metrics, right? I had 10,000 users on the website, but only 5 customers bought a product. That's a vanity metric. If you're telling me only 5 customers bought something and you have 10,000 customers on your website, there's something seriously wrong with your product experience, right? Growth, you know, how are you building from a product lens, this might be like, hey, you built a new product and now you're in a bigger market, or you're tackling a different customer now. So now you've made your total addressable market much bigger, right? And these, right, are not all owned by product, right? These can also be influenced by the business. So this is where like understanding like partnership is important, right? Because for revenue, you guys can come out with a new product, but the business can innovate around how they're selling it, right? Maybe they don't want to sell the product for a high amount. Maybe they want to make it free. but maybe all of the transactional things that happen in that product are what's going to drive revenue. So that's why they give it for free, right? There are a lot of things that you might not be in those conversations, but it's good to know, right? Like if you know that your business counterparts are making decisions around these 4 bullets, and there's more, right? There's other areas that they can, get creative with, that you'll want to understand, right? How can you support some of those decisions, or how can you influence some of those decisions? Reduction in operating costs, right? Like, are you building an internal tool that might automate some things, right? Or maybe some API that removes like the need to have to do something manually. And then last but not least, are you improving the customer experience? By doing that, now you made your customer happy, right? They might want to go to another customer when somebody asks them, how are they doing, right? They call that NPS, right? Net Promoter Score. And that really tells a story of like, hey, if would you recommend your product to another customer? If the answer is yes, or like, and they usually have a range of 1 to 10, right? If they don't choose, like, I believe 7 or above, that means that customer is not going to, right? That means that your experience, in all honesty, is not good enough. Either that or the service experience wasn't very good. But if you're relying on a service person to help your customer, then I'd say that you haven't thought well enough about your product experience either. Okay, I will pause there. One thing actually I didn't mention in here as well is the finance side of things, right? So when you're building a case to build a new product, or asking for money so you can improve something, you have to understand what your return is, right? Your executives want to know, hey, if I'm going to give you all of this money, how am I going to get it back? And then some, right? I don't want to give you money just for it not to come back. So what's the return on investment, right? So understanding a little bit about finance will really help you understand how your executives are thinking, right? As well as your business leaders, right? You work with tactical folks that like work directly with your clients and customers, right? Or users. And then you have like your business general manager or president, or somebody that reports into the executives, who's going to want to also understand like how, like, if you're going to build this thing, like this means it's going to grow my business, right? So partnering with that person is going to help you. Partnering with finance is also going to help you. It'll help you become a more well-rounded product person. And then you start to understand why, as a product person, like the trajectory is usually one of 2 things, right? You're usually a builder, meaning you don't ever want to leave like the tactical side, right? Because you love working with engineering and design and making product decisions. And then there's a leader, right? Somebody who at some point will leave the product role and become like a founder, CEO, or an executive, ultimately an investor at some point potentially, right? And to get to that level, you need to understand every part of the business, right? And that's why I think product folks have a really good opportunity in making the jump and career trajectory because of that. Okay, cool. Let's jump back to these questions. There's a lot of them, so maybe I can comb through them as fast as I can.
Yes. So next we have question from Akshay once again. Akshay, I'm skipping your question for now. We have a lot of questions. If we have some time, we'll take it forward again.
Yeah.
Akriti has a question. Are there any must-haves for a product management in order to get towards more strategic approach? Some tools or guidelines you would want to share?
Yeah, I would just say, like, again, it doesn't matter what tools you use, right? Your company is likely going to have a tool already. Use it. If you don't have access to it, then work with your leader to talk through some of those questions that you might have. But ask the question, right? If you don't ask the question, then you're not going to be in those discussions. So I just say, ask those questions. What do you want to know, right? You don't know what you don't know, right? So when you ask the first question, then you're going to start to have more questions, and then you're going to become more interested, right? And you're not, I guess, depending on how much time you have with your boss, you could at least take those questions and then figure out how to understand them, and then come back to him later when you have another chance and ask, more detailed questions. That's how you're going to learn, right? It's just making sure that you understand what you're asking for, and and you just ask them. Most people don't. Yeah, coffee over Zoom in these times, definitely.
Next we have question from Pavan. Any advice for solo product managers in a startup?
That could get very lonely. I can see that. I mean, you likely have an engineering team, right? Or a couple engineers, maybe there's only so much that you can do within your company, right? That really helps you. One thing I didn't mention here is go be a part of a community, right? This pragmatic community is awesome. I'm also I'm also a leader of a community called PMA LA, which is an LA-based product community. And we've built an awesome community there, right? Where we can connect with different people, and we meet every other week in some cases. And then in most like sessions we have, they're monthly. So I think you're doing all the right things. If you're feeling a little lonely, then try to build a relationship with somebody that you work with, somebody that you get along with, or somebody that you might not get along with. There's been times where I've taken some people I haven't really agreed with out to lunch, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, like our relationship's been transactional for so long, I just never even knew who you were, right? And you start to like somebody because of that.
So next question we have from Krunal. As product manager, what we have to do for getting confidence from teams as well as boss on execution of project?
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, focus more on the strategy. If you can't answer a simple question as to like why you did something, you're going to lose all credibility really fast. And one of the other two things, actually, being very transparent. If you are not transparent about how things are going, you're going to lose all confidence from your stakeholders, and you're never going to get it back, right? If you're going to miss a deadline, as soon as you know that you're going to miss that deadline, you better let everyone know that, right? And let them know why. And then you'll gain that respect, because now they know that you are strong enough to tell people that, hey, you know what, I'm sorry, like we're just not going to make it, and then being honest. If people ask you questions that you don't know, don't pretend like you know them. Say something like, you know what, that's a great question, I'm going to take that one back and I'll come back to you with it. I had an executive one time ask me a question around a metric, and I completely blanked out, and I was like, you know what, I know that metric. I just what I'll do is I'll come back to you with it, and then we can review it. Right? It doesn't feel good, but at least now you've at least let the leader know that you know what they're asking for, and you just didn't have it. Right? It's better than saying like the metric is XYZ. They start questioning you, and then they realize you lied. Right? You just want to make sure you're transparent and honest.
Right. Next we have question from Anup. With remote work potentially taking off soon, how would you look at networking, especially the informal tasks which help build relationships?
Yeah. Honestly, treat it like you would if you were offline. I think people are more open to having digital conversations now, because now everyone's forced to. It's not like nothing happened and the world is gradually becoming more remote, kind of like how it has been the last 10 years. Now everyone is. So, go set up a session with somebody that you're interested in talking to. And be very purposeful, right? Nobody wants to spend 30 minutes talking about nothing. So make sure you have a topic to discuss that you're interested that somebody can help you with.
So next question we have from Tejas. Could you please cite practical example of output and outcome?
Yeah, and I'll take it from Robert here. So if you look at the next question, right? So sharing something has to be contextually relevant without asking for something. And he mentions Robert Cialdini's book on persuasions, right? Output is thinking more of like, how much work can I produce without really taking into account how effective that work is, right? So if you're just releasing and there's no real value there, right? Then that's not an outcome. That's really just like, hey, I moved something to production and it didn't really bring anybody any value, right? So if I produce an outcome, it's like, great, I moved something to production, I moved the needle, right? This metric went down or it improved, and I can, and now my customer is more happy, right? That's an outcome. An output is, it's just it's meaningless, right? So that's why sometimes when you get into conversations around like, hey, we have to do some work around technical debt, right? Technical debt doesn't really bring any customer value. Sometimes it can, if it makes the product faster or more reliable, right? But those are the things that you have to think through when you're working with your product teams. Okay, I think we're over time now, Piyush. Do we want to, maybe what we can do is, if you want, if you can maybe export these questions in a document and I can take them. I'll join the Slack channel that you mentioned as well.
So I'll copy paste all these questions to the Slack channel, and we can take all these questions forward from there.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good.
So that's all. Thanks a lot, Miles, for taking out time and conducting such an insightful session for Pragmatic Leaders. I'm sure we'll have got a lot of insights and of entirely, I would say, of a lot of takeaways we have got from this session, and we would have you once like to have you once again for another session. And
appreciate it.
yeah.
Thanks, Piyush. Thanks, everyone.
Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants for joining us today. In case you have any queries, you can feel free to reach out to us anytime. And Miles will be joining our Slack community, so you'll be able to connect with him after the session. And apart from this, recording of this session will be published on our YouTube channel. So in next 2-3 days, I'll share the link of the recording in our community as well. So you all can stay updated with all the relevant stuff over there. So that's all from my end. Thanks a lot once again.
Thanks, Piyush. Thanks, everyone.